Good afternoon, change makers and social innovators all across Africa and the world. We welcome you to another great edition of the Social Impact webinar. We're super pumped and excited to have every of our viewers tuned in this afternoon. We have our very amazing guest speaker in the studio already and is ready to enlighten us better on our topic for this edition, which is again themed Good Governance and Public Policy Part 2. So, just before we dive right into this very enriching edition, I would want you to please copy the YouTube link. And if you're joining us from LinkedIn, copy the LinkedIn live link and share it across your sphere of influence. Put it up on your WhatsApp, um, put it up on your WhatsApp, put it on your Instagram pages, put it up on Facebook, put it up on LinkedIn, share it within your spheres of influence, and have as many of your community members and colleagues join in. We're super excited to have every of our community members tuned in. So if you're tuned in at this time, just type in the comment section where you're joining us from. We would love to read from you. Let us know your name, your organization, and the part of the world you're tuning in from. Whether it's from Namibia, it's from Tanzania, it's from China, it's from the US, it's from the UK. We would love to read from you. While we just settle in, please let the comments come in and we excitedly read those comments. Again, we are treating a very interesting topic and we're really excited about this one. It's really in tandem with the current happenings and the current political happenings, and we're super excited to be aligned with what is going on. So we would love to read from you. I can see that people are tuned in already. So type in the comment section your name, where you're joining us from, as well as your location. All right. As I said earlier on, we have tuned in already, or rather, we have in the studio Mark Amaza, our guest speaker, who is a senior communications officer at Yiaga Africa. He also has so much experience within the political space. Just as I am waiting for the comments to come in, I will go ahead to introduce our speaker so that he can definitely have the floor to take us on his presentation. Thereafter, we will get into the Q&A session where you will have the opportunity to ask your questions, and we'll also take some curated questions that we have. All right. So Mark Amaza is a development communications and policy expert with over 5 years experience in the Nigerian development sector. He has worked in the sustainability sector with focus on energy access and circular economy, and also consulted on political and economic risk analysis matters in Nigeria and West Africa for local and international organizations. He currently works as the Senior Communications Officer at Yiaga Africa, a civil society organization that works on democratic governance and civil engagement issues in Nigeria and across Africa. In his current role, he is responsible for ensuring that strategic communication is at the heart of Yiaga Africa's work with its diverse stakeholders, communities, and target audiences. Mark is also a member of the strategic team of the Not Too Young to Run movement, which successfully advocated for constitutional amendments that lowered the age of eligibility for elective offices. Mark is a regular opinion contributor to local and international media on contemporary political and economic issues in Nigeria and has been quoted in several publications. He holds a first degree in environmental management from the Abubakar Tafawa Balewa University, Bauchi, and is a master's in and also holds a master's degree in business administration. Is a master's in business administration candidate at the University of East London, United Kingdom. We're super excited to have the very amazing and very quintessential Mark Amaza. All right. Thank you, Mark. Thank you once again. You're live.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you once again. Just before I hand over the baton to you, I just want to welcome our viewers and community members. I can see Mercy Alimi. Welcome on board. You're joining us all the way from Nigeria. I can see Oladejo as well. So keep the comments engaging, and of course, get your questions ready. Once we get into the Q&A forum, you can definitely type in your question. But nonetheless, if you have any questions, I'm sure that at the end, we will be ready to take on those questions. All right. Mark, over to you. You have the floor.
All right, thank you. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Hoping that this will be a very rewarding time where we talk about public policy, good governance, and especially how you as citizens can play a role in effecting good governance in your community, in your local area, in the country as a whole. So let me start like Toyin introduced. My name is Mark Amaza, and I'm the Senior Communications Officer at Yiaga Africa. Yiaga Africa is a non-profit civic hub of change makers, and we promote democratic governance, human rights, and civic engagement. So a lot of our work revolves around working with building communities that will engage in democracy, engaging with legislatures, and also around strengthening elections in terms of participation and the credibility of elections. So in the space of 45 minutes, we'll try to understand good governance and public policy, and we'll also try to analyze how effective public policy in Nigeria has been. And very importantly, maybe even most importantly, how you as citizens can shape public policy. Now, what is good governance? Simply put, good governance is, let's start by talking about governance. That's the process by which decisions are made and implemented. That's just that simple. You make a decision and implement it, and that's basically governance. What makes governance good? That is when the political and institutional processes and outcomes achieve the goals of development. So it's not just enough to make decisions and implement them. When they now achieve development, they achieve positive outcomes. And you look at all the processes that come to play in making that happen. You can say good governance can be said to have taken place. Now, for good governance to happen, there are eight parameters it should meet, or it must meet. If you look at the octagon on the slide, so it must be accountable, it must be transparent, it must be responsive, it must be equitable and inclusive, in the sense of it must enable the participation of everyone, include everyone that's part of that community or society to be part of the process of making it happen. It must be effective and efficient. Efficient in terms of making the best of resources, effective in terms of achieving its objective. It must follow the rule of law. It's not just enough to have governance happen outside the ambit of law and then justify that, say the end has justified the means. And we see that happening a lot of times. So if, for example, let's say there are houses that are built illegally in a particular place, they're not following zoning laws or town planning laws, and then just go ahead to demolish without having followed the law that let's say there's a law that defines how this demolition order should be given. While the objective is good in terms of making sure that people adhere to the town planning laws, the process has circumvented the law. It does not follow the rule of law. In that case, you can't say good governance has happened. It must be participatory. Everyone must participate in good governance, whether you're a man or a woman, all genders across ethnicities, religions, income classes must participate for good governance to happen, must be participatory, and must be consensus oriented. There must be some form of consensus on what the objectives are. It's likely that not everyone will agree on what objective is, but there should be a broad consensus. And when good governance happens, you will see that it's first of all minimizes corruption because of the account. It's accountable, it's transparent, so corruption is minimized. It also takes the views of minorities into account. A lot of times we hear democracy is about the majority, or the majority carries the votes. And while yes, majority carries the votes, it does not mean that the views of minorities should be ignored or diminished. It takes that into consideration. And also ensures that the voices of the most vulnerable in society are heard in decision making. So in a case where, for example, you say those who are of a lower income class would not have the financial means to make enough noise. It's very important that those kind of people are also who are vulnerable are also heard in decision making. So, if, for example, let's say, um, give an example in Lagos State where you've had cases of squatter settlements being cleared, and then to make way for highbrow areas, those vulnerable people need to have their decisions their voices heard in decision making. It should not just be enough that they're diminished because they are downtrodden or they are lower class. And also, it must be responsive to present and future needs. Very, very important. So while governance happens here in the present and takes care of the present needs, you must also be forward-looking and anticipate what's going to happen 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 50 years from now. And we see that happen a lot of times where we have, locally here in Nigeria, we have development plans. So whether it's, for example, we had the mid to late 90s agenda 2010 that was forecasting the development of Nigeria up to the year 2010. We have currently plans around the agenda 2035 and 2050. They are forecasting and they are trying to put in place good governance policies and instruments that will ensure the development we hope happens or desire in those years to happen. So it's responsive to the present needs and the future needs, so you anticipate as well. Now, what is public policy? We'll talk about good governance. What is public policy? Basically, we're talking about a system of laws, regulatory measures, courses of action, and funding priorities that concern given topic by a government entity or its representatives. So it's a mix of these things, mix of laws, regulations, action plans, and also funding priorities. What you give money to, how much money you give to that topic for government, whether government as a whole or an agency of government. Now, if you look at, there are 4 types of public policies. You have substantive, regulatory, distributive, and redistributive. I'll go into each of these ones briefly. So, for example, talk about substantive policies. You're looking at policy actions that affect political systems or society in a major way. So, for example, in the US in 1964 or thereabouts, the Civil Rights Act came into effect. And the Civil Rights Act was a major legislation in terms of integrating the American society across racial lines. It also had impact around fair housing, around integrating schools. All of those things was a major effect. Here in Nigeria, for example, we have the Not Too Young to Run bill, which was a constitutional amendment that was signed in 2018. And affected the political system in a major way by reducing the ages of eligibility for young people to contest. So previously, to run for House of Assembly or House of Representatives, you have to be at least 30 years old. For president to be at least 40. By reducing these ages by 5 years is a major impact because it now enabled thousands of young people to be able to run for office, previously which they wouldn't have been able to because they'll have to wait until they're that minimum age. Policy could also be regulatory, where you want to keep a check on the tendencies of institutions or people to divert from established plans and schemes. Another way to look at it is in terms of where you can't just depend on the good intentions of people to do the right thing. So you need to put in place regulations to make sure they do the right thing. For example, drugs and food regulation. If I were to establish or introduce a new drug into the market, let's say a drug that cures Alzheimer's disease, I ought to follow the laid down regulations where I go through How do I do the testing of this drug? How do I get registered by NAFDAC, which is the regulator for drugs, that now ascertains or certifies the drug is fit for humans or food for human consumption. If we're just be left to our own devices, we'll have lots of people introducing all kinds of drugs. And I mean, we've dealt with that in Nigeria in recent past. We had an influx of fake drugs because people will just do what they will without any regulation to keep them in check. So regulatory policies are an important type of policies. Another type of public policy is distributive, where you want to render goods and services to members of institution or an organization or across society, and to also distribute their costs. So you're looking at, for example, in terms of public welfare and assistance programs. Specifically, if you're looking at, let's say, public education or health services or public highways or public healthcare, these are distributive because they intend to make sure that everyone in society gets these goods and services, and the costs are spread across, And in terms of course, they're looking at, let's say, through via taxation. So those are distributive policies. But then what happens when you now want to make sure that those distributive policies really, maybe they are not effective enough, and you want to ensure that they are effective in reaching everyone in society? You now have redistributive policies, where those distributive policies are rearranged to bring around specific changes in economic and social status of the states. If, for example, the government now introduces a new tax laws that increases the tax, income tax on wealthier members of society, it's redistributing income, because by that doing, they are able to invest or increase their investment in public welfare, in social goods that can reach everyone. So it could be that they're looking at increasing funding for primary education for disadvantaged communities. That's redistributive. They have redistributed wealth in a way that more people have access to public goods and services. Now, what are the futures you have for a public policy? There are basically four futures. First, public policy has to be goal-oriented. There must be a goal you have in mind. If, for example, Nigeria as a goal says we want to make sure that 95% of Nigerians enjoy financial inclusion, are part of our financial system. That's a goal for a public policy. Connected to that, we can start looking at how do we then increase financial inclusion? What laws do we need? What policies do we need? What action plans do we need to create to implement to achieve the policies? That's a future. If a policy is not goal-oriented, you will not be able to know what exactly you're working towards. Public policy is also the result of all government actions. So all of government actions, whether across government or in a particular sector, form what the public policy is. For example, let's say the judiciary. Judiciary is made up of not just the courts, but also of not just the judges, but also all the people that are part of the judiciary in terms of the court registers, the bailiffs, even the lawyers that might not be employed by government but are part of the judiciary, all come together in delivering justice. That's a collective of all actions, but especially of government actions. If we're looking at, for example, a policy such as the Nigerian policy on climate change, that's a policy that involves a multitude of government agencies, from the Ministry of Science and Technology, the Energy Commission of Nigeria, Ministry of Power, all the different power agencies. That collective of their government actions achieves government policy on climate change in Nigeria. Also, public policy can take several forms. It could be via a law, like I explained earlier. For example, the Not Young to Run bill is a law that came into effect. It could be via a policy. I give example, for example, a national policy on climate change, or a national policy for broadband, almost policy about every sector. It could be via an executive order. So an executive order is somewhat where perhaps it's where the president institutes a policy or an order that carries almost the weight of a law. It's not a law, but it has significant weight in getting that defines policy actions for government and for private, or for the public, for the society to work with. Could be also via judicial decisions where there's judgment that now becomes precedent. So, for example, there's currently late last year, the federal High Court ruled that VAT should be paid to states, not to the federal government. Now, that is judicial decision that defines policy. If that judgment is upheld to the Supreme Court, companies and organizations will now, and individuals will now start paying VAT directly to states and not to the federal government. Is a policy, has become policy. Also, public policy is an indicator of what government is concerned about. So, if, for example, your today in 2022, a government does not have, especially a federal government, does not have a policy around, say, blockchain, is indicated that that blockchain has not become important enough to them. It could also have far-reaching implications in terms of it's unable, because of that lack of, that is not, they're not concerned about enough to define to have a policy around it, whether the public, and whether it's public sector or private sector, will be unsure on how to deal with blockchain. How does a government agency, for example, does a project that will integrate blockchain? So it's an indicator of what government is concerned about. There's this quote that is very, very instructive here. Public policy is whatever a government chooses to do or even not to do. So what there's no public policy around, or what it doesn't define, is also an indicator, is also a choice of what the government is not doing. Now, one of the two questions I received in my briefing for this webinar was, one, is there public policy in Nigeria? To that, I will say yes. They will have a plethora, a multitude of policies at all levels, whether it's at federal level or state level, and I could even say at local government level. So there is public policy in Nigeria. Now, is there good governance in Nigeria? It sounds like a rhetorical question. In my opinion, I would say no. And that is because governance in Nigeria has not yet met these 8 parameters I defined earlier. It's not participatory in many ways. It's not consensus-oriented in many ways. It's not fully accountable or transparent or responsive. Can be seen to be equitable and inclusive in terms of ensuring that the impacts are across society and everyone is included. A lot of times, government policies or governance in Nigeria does not make the best use of resources, so you can't say it to be efficient. A good example is how we see for the past, at least since 2010, we have had almost every federal government talk about the cost of governance and how it needs to cut down governance, the cost of government. And yet, rather than see government shrink, we have seen government expand. That is not the best use of resources. For those of us who are familiar with following the happenings in government, we know about the Oronsai report since 2012 that recommended how government can be trimmed because of duplication, which leads to waste of resources. Yet that hasn't happened. In many times, governance does not follow the rule of law. Whether it's at federal level, state levels, a lot of times it steps outside laid down law to do its own thing in the expectation that the end will justify the means. But that does not make it good governance. So to that question, I will say good governance in Nigeria has not yet happened. Now, there are many reasons why public policy in Nigeria hasn't, or is where it is and has not translated into good governance. So for example, we have in many cases poor policy design, where you have government policies that are, for example, they not properly target beneficiaries, where the resources are thinly allocated, where you have policies that, or where there's overlapping of functions of agencies. All of this constitute poor policy design, besides other reasons that do not translate into good governance. You have situations where, for example, policies are not the targets or the goals are not clearly stated. All of these are part of poor policy design. You also have cases where there's political interference and instability. In situations where, for example, you have, for example, let's say when it's an election and is now, for example, for governorship or even for presidential elections, and a winner is declared, and a loser or a one of the candidates in the election, I'm not call them losers, challenges that election in courts, that often leads to political instability, because whatever policy that government whose legitimacy is being challenged is unable to really define policies because it's waiting on the outcome of courts. That so it does even political instability in the ambit of a democracy. We're not even going to a point where we talk about things like where, for example, there are now coups. Good thing is we have these are longest period of democracy, and long may this continue. But in such cases, for example, that instability affects public policy. And why it affects public policy is that a lot of times there's no political continuity. We have situations where a government defines a policy, or and then a successive government throws it out. And it doesn't sometimes it could even be that even if the successor and predecessor are same political parties, but that happens very, very often where you in the 4 or 8 years that government is in power, it does what it can with in terms of implement the policy, and then once the next government comes in, that's the end. And a lot of it affects a lot in terms of how the private sector, how development agencies interface with government. So you now have where development agencies, for example, try to work as early as possible with governments in the work with governments as early as possible in the beginning of their tenures, because there is the fear based on what has happened time and again that if once the government is out of office, the next government might not have the same enthusiasm for that policy or project. Then you also have poor governance, and like we explained earlier, there's that which oftentimes leads to projects being abandoned, where either it's corruption, it's been not having the right people to drive that policy or project, and whatnot, and those things lead to negative outcomes. Also, there's lack of citizen participation a lot of times, where often we have governments define policies and projects and don't include the people in how that is being designed. So, if, for example, now, imagine me as a state governor, and I now decide, you know what my state needs will be an airport, and I just go ahead to now start, putting together budget for an airport, all the public procurement, get a contractor, and start constructing an airport. But perhaps my people do not need an airport. Perhaps they can't even afford to fly. And what's most needed might be roads that connect from villages to the city, roads in within the cities, because I've not involved them in designing the policy, the project around the air travel and airports, they're not going to have negative outcomes. And by the way, this is not just a hypothetical situation. This happens a lot. We see a lot of times, even in these specific examples, where states, for example, build airports, and it's airports
Mark, please continue. We can hear
okay.
you now.
Okay, my video was paused, so I was a bit worried that I had gone offline. So yes, so I was saying the lack of citizen participation. If governments were going to engage citizens in how they design public policy, you will have a lot less negative outcomes, because the proverb that says you can't shave a man's head in his absence. They were able to maybe question the assumptions they have made about how effective their policies and projects will be. So basically, it's the state of public policy in Nigeria, which leads to those negative outcomes. And why I say I do not believe that good governance happens in Nigeria yet. Now, let me give an example of how public policy fails in Nigeria. If you look at this list, these are all the public policies, key public policies at the federal level that are just focused on agriculture from 1976 to date, over the past 40 years. So you had during the Obasanjo military government, we had Operation Feed the Nation. And by the time President Shehu Shagari came to government in 1979, he introduced Green Revolution. Now, even though he left office in 1983, or he was overthrown in the coup in 1983, we now had there was no substantive policy that replaced Green Revolution until 86 under the Babangida military government, where you now had what was called DFRI. You had agencies like Nigerian Agricultural Insurance Corporation, and now that stopped in 1989, all the way to 2000, where there's the Nigerian Agricultural Cooperative and Rural Development Bank. Now that bank has now become the Bank of Agriculture. You now had in 2000 and the Forestry Development Program in 2000 as well. You have during the Goodluck administration the Agricultural Transformation Agenda, and under the current administration you have a lot of policies around agriculture. But key among them, you have the Anchor Borers Program, which is being driven by the CBN and the Presidential Fertilizer Initiative. Now, if you see like all these policies, and there are also many that have missed in between due to sadly a lack of history of record keeping. But a lot of this policy flip-flops and somersaults make it very unstable for, say, someone who wants to invest in agriculture on a commercial basis to come in and say, okay, this is what the policy says, and I can work with this policy. And the effect, and this has real impact on citizens. You have little implications, including economic underdevelopment. So in a situation where policies keep changing from one administration to another administration, or even within the last one of one administration, it leads to economic underdevelopment. Because these are real life, people with real lives that are the receiving end of these policy flip-flops. It leads to a waste of resources. Because for every policy or project, and I'm putting projects as policies, because if a government decides, like in my first example, to prioritize an airport over highways, is a policy statement they are making in terms of their betting on that project to deliver development to the people. In a case where it doesn't, the analysis waste of resources, the opportunity costs are huge. If a government carries, say, 25 billion naira to build an airport that is not being used optimally, that is 25 billion naira it can have put somewhere else. Could have used that 25 billion naira to, say, work on rural highway, rural roads, or to invest in public education or public healthcare. And on end result of that is when citizens see these projects and policies that do not deliver on development, or even lead to negative development and a waste of resources, it demotivates them. It now begins to see where citizens do not have faith in government delivering on good governance. Also leads to less patriotism. And we see a lot of that, for example, when you have people talk about the whole jackpot trend, because people have lost faith. They have lessened patriotism in governance, good governance happening due to all of these factors. And of course, it begins to make them feel alienated. I hear a lot of people say, after all, government will do it in one do. They don't involve them? They feel excluded from the governance process. So that's one of the indications of public policy failures. Also, importantly, it leads to a non-improvement in human capital. So, due to all of this, the people that are the receiving end, it doesn't improve the human capital, which is any society's biggest asset. Whether it's in terms of, for example, if there's students are demotivated and they're less patriotic, and for example, now leave or JACPA, you now have, of course, you have lost brains from that society, or you're unable to invest in the education of people, in the healthcare of people that will also improve their human capital. So these are real life implications of public policy failures that lead to this cycle of bad governance. Now, like I said earlier, a very important question is, how can citizens be involved in public decision making? How can we be involved in a way that we can shape the outcomes? And it's very, very important. This especially because in a democracy, the biggest advantage democracy has over other forms of government is not even in the good governance or dividends of democracy, is in citizen participation. So if you look at, for example, there are many countries around the world that are developed or are better developed than we but are not democracies. The UAE, for example, is not a democracy, or countries like China are not democracies. But the downside to that is that in such kind of countries, you're depending on the benevolence of governments to deliver on good governance. And this is also where, for example, we have had, we went around with military regimes. If you look at the micro level, maybe in many states, you could even say, oh, military government delivered better than civilian government, but it not involve citizens in the decision making. So if the governments wake up today and say, what we're going to do today is we're going to expropriate or seize all land in this state or in this country becomes owned by the government, and then puts a decree pass a decree to that effect. Citizens were not involved in that decision making, so their voices are not able to be heard. Where people talk about the loss of their property and property rights, or how it affect business and investments, and so on and so forth. But in a democracy, the idea of democracy is citizen participation, where you and I are able to participate in every aspect of it, not just voting, but in every way, engaging with elected officials, in speaking out through the media and through every outlet we have, and through that, we're able to shape outcomes. But how can we do that better? How can we do that more? And especially for a democracy like ours, where there's still a lot left to be desired in ensuring citizens are involved in public decision making. So first is for citizens to be informed. Without citizens being adequately and well informed, you're unable to take part in public decision making. Which is why Thomas Jefferson said, if he was forced to make a choice between a society with no government, with media but no government, or one with government but no media, he would choose the former. Because being informed is a very, very important aspect of being involved. And being informed doesn't only have to be via reading the newspapers, or watching news. It's basically just trying to get as much information as you can about governance, either governance broadly speaking, or even governance specific to an area you're interested in. And it's somewhere that a lot of us are lacking in. We might know the broader points to what's happening, but we do not know the final details, and it affects how we engage. And I'll give an example. We get an example where people say things like, "Oh, our votes do not count, so why should we vote?" And you try to bring up people like, "Okay, have you been getting information, about vote buying?" And you understand the fact that vote buying is an indicator that even politicians know that your votes are counting. So rather than rig the elections, they'll rather buy your votes. And so you see, that's where a lack of information on the citizens' part has them not participating. They believe that even if I vote, my vote will not count. Meanwhile, politicians are out there looking for your vote to buy. But because you have not been informed adequately, you are not participating. Or for example, where there's not enough information, you don't have enough information about, let's say, if government is introducing a new law. Let's say, for example, government is introducing a bill that will regulate your social media activities. How much information do you have about that law that's being proposed? In terms of the content of that law, in terms of what the impact will be. If you do not have that information, how do you unable to engage with your lawmaker or representative to say, I think this law will be good, or I think this law is a bad idea because it leads to this negative outcome. So being informed is the very first step to participating adequately. Now, the other aspect is organizing. And it's very, very important because if you're able to bring together a mass of people, a collection of people around an issue, you're able to have much more impact than if you're doing it alone. So to get alone, you go fast, or you may go fast, but together you will go far. And organizing is not rocket science. There are many ways you can organize. You can organize around an issue. If, for example, your issue that you're passionate about is about sanitation, or about maternal health, you're able to organize around that issue. You're able to find like-minded people that believe in that cause, able to put heads together and say, okay, how can we get our heads together and make changes that we desire in this area? You can organize around your locality. So it could be as little as your street, your ward. And this is somewhere that Nigerians, however, we lack a lot, especially at the local levels. We do not organize, for example, at the local government level. We're able to push for governance. If this was I was able to see my audience, I'd like to ask, how many of you know your local government chairman or chairpersons? How many of you know your councillors? How many of you know your House of Assembly members, or your House of Representative member? These are ways you can organize. So imagine if you were, say, for example, if you're in Abuja and in the Amak Area Council, the Abuja Municipal Area Council, and you want to organize in your ward, let's say Wuse ward, and you're able to figure out, like, look, this is an issue that is within the purview of the area council. How can you can find like-minded people in this Wuse ward to organize and to meet our council and to press our demands? That is organizing. So organizing does not have to be on a grand scale, like on the federal level. It could be even on a granular level, at your local government level, at your ward level. You can organize around your locality, you can organize around the issues you believe in or that you're passionate about. Next is to engage. So you are informed about an issue. You have organized another issue. The next is you engage. Who do you engage? You engage the people that are going to make those decisions. Your policy makers, elected representatives. If I, Mark, am in Wuse ward and I'm concerned about, for example, open defecation in Wuse ward, which I think can be solved by putting public toilets in my ward, especially around where there are a lot of commercial activity, say the Wuse market, and I've organized my fellow residents in the Wuse ward, I now need to engage. I engage my councillor. I find my councillor and engage and present our demands. I engage our area council chairman, and present our demands. I engage in terms of the area legislative assembly of the area council. Where, for example, the area council brings its budget, I engage in making sure I have the information about the budget and say there's not enough budget for public toilets in my ward. Engagement is very, very critical. So that way, you're not just complaining in your living rooms or in your closeted spaces, but you are reaching out to the people which will now make decisions on the things you want. Now, the last bit is advocacy. You need to advocate for the things you believe in. You need to, let me use the word, make noise. Make informed, well-articulated noise. And I'll give an example with the Not Young to Run bill, which I'm part of the movement that made it happen. We realized that there was a problem in terms of the low proportion of young people in government, which for us was very, very important, considering the fact that Nigeria is a majorly young country, so by virtue of our population, and yet it did not correlate with how there are very few young people in government. And one huge blocker we saw was the fact that the minimum age for contesting elections was rather too high to allow for the outcomes we desire. Now, if we're not informed about the constitutional requirements for running for election, we'll not have been able to note that problem. If we just kept complaining that, there need to be more young people than in government, but there's not enough young people in government, without knowing why, would have been in the same spot. But we noted the fact that the Constitution said you have to be at least 30 to run for House of Assembly, House of Representatives, 35 for Governor and Senate, and 40 for presidency. And wanted to have more young people in government because more young people in government leads to more inclusion. And young people are able to better, that inclusion will lead to more better governance outcomes. If, for example, you have a decision makers that are all in their mid-50s and 60s talking about, say, how we can use entertainment, something that young people can relate to a lot as a tool of diplomacy. They may not be able to relate. They may have an ageist approach to entertainment where they see entertainment as young people just playing around. But you, as a young person who's engaged in entertainment on an almost daily basis, and likely have young people, acquaintances and friends who have seen entertainment transform their lives, whether it's music or movies or the performing arts are able to see differently and say, no, this is how this can be done this way. So this just give you an idea of why inclusion is also important. But being informed for us in the Not Young to Run movement was our starting point. The next thing we did was we organized. We organized by finding other people who believed in what we believed in. That's why the Not Young to Run movement is not just a strategy team that's mostly in Abuja, but we have 36 state chapters and teams who also build local government teams. All and and it's a movement made of over 100 organizations, showing you the power of organizing. We organized around the issues we're passionate about, around the problem we've identified based on the information we have. We took it to the next step. We began to engage, and we began to engage our lawmakers because what we wanted was a constitutional amendment. And to make a constitutional amendment happen in Nigeria, you need the amendment to be passed by first the National Assembly, and then by at least 24 state houses of assembly. So we met with lawmakers that were going to be willing to sponsor our bills in the Senate and the House of Representatives. When the National Assembly set up a constitutional review committee, we engaged.
All right. I believe Mark is experiencing some network issues. It would definitely join us again because I can see that the screen is static. So I'm sure he's trying to sort that out. I can see that a lot of us have started typing in our questions, and most definitely we will take the questions at the end of Mark's presentation. I'm sure he will definitely join us again. It's a network glitch from his end. Please confirm that you can hear me in the comment section. Kindly type in the comment section that you can hear me so that I'm crystal sure that it's not a situation from my end. So please let's just type in the comment section if you can hear me audibly, and you can also see my video clearly and it's not static. I would love to read your comments. Thank you. All right, please confirm in the comment section that you can hear me. All right, Mark is back in the studio. Um, all right, Mark. I guess
And
that
my
was a
apologies.
network glitch.
It is
Yes,
a network
yes, no
glitch.
problem.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, let me
Um,
continue with my slides.
yes, please. Just put it up again so that I can exactly. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, please continue.
So I think I remember where I was. Let me just control it from my end.
So I think you were in slide 19. Yes,
Yes. Yes.
19.
So
Yes.
yeah. So I was talking about advocacy. I said one huge difference between engagement and advocacy is that with advocacy, you're not just trying to get only the decision makers. It's also trying to get the public to be on your side, which will also play a role in influencing decision makers. So as an advocate, so for us, for example, with Not Young to Run, we did a lot of advocacy in terms of engaging the public. We needed to convince the public to say, look, this is a problem, and this is a solution that we believe to the problem. So we did all kinds of advocacy where we had, like, for example, a lot of media appearances, TV, radio, newspapers. We actually had in-person events, sort of like debates, because the young people, for example, didn't believe that that was a problem or that was a solution. We also had debates where we also heard their views and maybe to meet them over. Your advocacy approach might be different and and you have to make it contextual, something that is specific to your context. In your own advocacy approach, maybe what you need to do might be a door-to-door approach, where you go door-to-door in your neighborhood and knock and say, do you know this, do you know of this, do you know of this, do you know of that? And then begin to have those conversations. Might be convening a town hall or a neighborhood meeting. Might be even engaging, for example, in your estate, for example, which maybe perception to advocacy, might be engaging on your estate WhatsApp group or neighborhood WhatsApp group. There are numerous ways of doing advocacy. So be informed, organize, engage, and advocate. Now, one thing that I got me thinking while preparing for this webinar is what are the things why, even though I've been in democracy for 24 years now, approaching 24 years, why isn't civic participation still very much a part of us? Now, one key thing is the fact that, and these are some of the things that I believe limit civic participation. First, although the military has been back in the barracks since 1999, we still suffer a hangover from military rule. It's less now, but it still exists. And we see a lot of that, for example, and I'll give you a personal experience. When I started getting involved in or being more participatory, excuse me, and let's say, for example, I started with writing from Facebook posts to actually writing articles and so on. One thing people used to always tell me is that be careful, oh, be careful, oh. No, these people don't like being criticized. Be careful, oh, they'll come and get you. Excuse me. And that for me was why those concerns were well placed. It's a clear hangover of military rule where with military rule you cannot criticize government or criticize government openly. To be a dissident or an activist was pretty much a life-threatening choice. So that hangover still affects us in many, many ways. And it's also unfortunate that even though many of the civilian governments have, even though in a democracy, we've had many governments that still behave somewhat like military rulers, where they stifle dissent or stifle or limit free speech. You have cases where, even if not at the federal level, at many state level, where critics get arrested or get threatened by the government. So all of these things reinforce that hangover from the military rule. We have in many cases people are not just organized. I want to talk about that. We are all very much couch critics or armchair critics, but not enough of us take action to organize around issues we're very, very passionate about. Also because a lot of times also not even informed enough about the issues. And like I said earlier, again, organizing, you do not have to organize. You could choose to organize around everything. You could also choose to organize around the specific things you're concerned about. There are people, and if you see, for example, non-profit NGOs, CSOs, or community-based organizations, an example of organizing. Many of them, so many of us, since I work with an NGO or with a CSO, are very narrowly focused. So, for example, there are CSOs that all they focus on is legislative engagement, how to get legislators to work better, how to get people to bridge the relationship between the people and their legislators. That's all they are focused about. That's all they have organized about. So they have gone in deep on that issue. There are NGOs that are also organized around local. So, for example, I sit on the board of an NGO that's also organized around rural basic education. That's all their remit is. That's all they are concerned about. How can they get basic education to be better in rural areas? So you, even as individuals, do not have to transmit to an organization. Can be organized around the issues they are very passionate about, whether around your locality or around issues that are beyond your locality. Another factor is the poor state of our economy, where many times, because a lot of people live always on the air, live almost hand to mouth, are more concerned with just getting by, such that political participation is not what's critical on their priority list. How do they get fed? How do they get their families fed? How do they provide for themselves and their families? That is their priority, and then all this is relegated. Unfortunately, one negative outcome of it is that because of that, you're able to see where, for example, politicians weaponize poverty, for example, in buying votes, but also where they are not able to contribute and talk about how government policies or public policy is impacting them. One other aspect is a lack of unity, or lack of, in this case, specifically ethno-religious unity. Because of our fractures in Nigeria around ethnic, regional, religious lines, attempts to participate, especially where you're criticizing or critiquing government, are framed as in those in ethnic and religious ways. So, if, for example, say a Christian and I have a Muslim representative or governor, and I'm like, oh, this rep isn't doing well, and I try to organize, it can be easily cast as, oh, because you're a Christian, you're organizing against the Muslim representative, a Muslim government official, and or vice versa. And then you also have even around ethnic lines. I would say that play that all the time, not just around our elections, but through governments. And again, a lot of times politicians recognize these things and play to that, to this side of us. Now, remember, like I said earlier on, the key thing in a democracy is participation by all citizens and at every level. That's the key thing in a democracy. Um, Now, but then beyond just what citizens can do to increase civic participation, what can governments do to make it, to improve it? So first of all, governments need to be deliberate about inclusion. So you need to be deliberate to say, look, we want to hear from the voice of everyone, get them in. Or let's say, for example, a government is making setting up committees or making appointments. I want to be deliberate and to see enough young people in government, enough women in government. Let this government, what we're doing, will be reflective of the nature of our society. Enough persons with disabilities. We need to have this. It reflects how society looks like on the makeup of our society. Governments also need to provide more opportunities for engagement. For example, many times we see like in the National Assembly where there are a certain law is being proposed, there are public hearings for those bills. But because those public hearings are not mandatory, it's left at the discretion of the National Assembly or the committee that's in charge of that area. So that's one example. There needs to be more opportunity for engagement. In my legislators, for example, holding town hall meetings or having call centers or email addresses where citizens can engage them, or even being on social media, as simple as that. A lot of times we see government people avoid being on social media because they say they cannot handle the insults. And yes, while insults are not a good way to engage, there are also other positive engagements that can come out of being on social media where citizens know that we have access to you, we can give you feedback. So governments need to provide more opportunities. But they also need to use input from citizens because that will feed into the confidence of citizens to participate and engage more. If, for example, there's now government wants to do a project and it has provides opportunity.
Sorry, Mark, you're muted. Um, Sorry, Mark, we can't hear you clearly. It appears your sound is muted. Yes, yes, we can hear you
Sorry?
now. Your
Okay,
sound
so
was
I think,
muted at some point. Yes.
oh, okay. So I was speaking, let me go back a bit. So I was talking about, can you hear me
Yes,
now?
please. Yes, we can
So I was
hear you
saying that
clearly.
about how government need to provide more opportunities for civic participation, for engagement. Um, and I give an example of how many times National Assembly holds public hearings for bills, but because it's not mandatory, it's left to their discretion. But that's an example of providing opportunity for engagement. And there are many ways government can provide this opportunity for engagement. It could be as high level as public hearings or town halls. It could also be as even having an active social media presence where citizens can engage with a government official or government agency, or knowing that there's a phone call number they could call to engage, or an email address they could drop a line. And then also, governments need to use input from citizens because using input from citizens gives citizens confidence to engage more. If citizens know that I can point to precedents where the inputs they gave were used by governments, whether governments or government officials or agencies, they have more confidence to engage more. Now, we're entering a crunch time in our democracy. We have, we're leading up to elections. So, what must you do next year as a citizen to participate? First of all, vote. So, please, if you're registered to vote, keep your PVC handy. If you don't have your PVC, you haven't collected your PVC, collect your PVC. For a lot of people who are registered in the last registration window from June last year to August this year, PVCs are ready. Go to your INEC office in your local government area where you're registered and collect. Whether you have new voter, you've transferred, you've voted for replacement. And when I say vote for all offices, this is what I mean. We have a tendency to focus only on the presidential elections. In some cases, maybe at most governorship elections. And that is a mistake that we need to start correcting. Yes, the presidency is very, very important. It's the most, number one citizen of the country, or the most important office in the land, but all offices are important. So it's important that as you intend to vote, you look to vote in all offices: your House of Assembly, your House of Representatives, your Senate, governorship, presidency. And I'll give an example of where this happens a lot. In the FCT, for example, in the last election, we were 1.2 million votes for the presidency, for the FCT. When it came to Senate and the entire federal, there were 600,000. Now keep in mind that the presidential election and the Senate and House of Reps election were all happening on the same day. So you go to vote, you're given three ballot papers: presidency, Senate, and House of Representatives. But about half of those who voted for the Senate did not vote for voted for the presidency, did not vote for the Senate, even though they had been given ballot papers. This is a clear example of how we do not vote for many other offices, and every office is important, every single one. Now, next one is to know all the candidates. Is try and know all the candidates. So, for example, for presidency, we have 18 presidential candidates. Do you know them? Do you know who they are? Do you know what they stand for? Do you know their track record, their personality? Do you know what they are proposed to do if they are voting into office? And not just for the presidency, for all the other offices, for your governorship, for your Senate, for your House of Representatives, for your House of Assembly. Do not just look at the candidates that are making the most noise online or in your area. And one good way to know your candidate is INEC has released list of candidates for these offices. Go to that list. Look for who is my House of Assembly member for my local government. Who are they? Look at them. You can see their name from there. And from there, you have a starting point. You can begin to find out about them. Whether you're using your own research about search online, whether you're engaging people in the area, like, oh, do you know this guy or this lady? She's running for the House of Assembly. What do you know about her? Even if asking their own party members, yes, they'll be subjective, understandably, because they want their parties to win. But begin to know all the candidates. Now, from here to the election and beyond, continue being informed. That being informed is the first step as a citizen. Be informed. Do not just focus on the news that gets to you from your friends or your cycle, or you just read headline and consider being informed. Know the nitty-gritty of what is going on in your society, in your community, especially when it's governance related. You may not have the body for everything governance. What are those issues that are closest to your heart? Let's say, for example, you are someone who works in the IT sector, and what's most closest to your heart is in terms of what regulations affect your sector. How is government going to increase broadband, or is government increasing a tax on telecoms? Those kind of issues, be very, very informed about them. Now, another one is, as much as possible, join a political party. It is very, very important. And here is why. Yes, none of our parties is ideal. We even got on the leave and say none of our parties have ideologies yet. But as long as we are in a democracy, political parties are the vehicle via which people get into government, by elections. You do not have to want to run for a political office before you join a political party. And if anything, this election cycle has taught many of us is that there's something called delegates. And these delegates play a critical role in choosing candidates. And a lot of times these delegates are for sale. And so I've had a situation where we have candidates we would like to see emerge in parties, and then the delegates choose somebody else. And we are now very, very angry and going, how can they do this? But then, to quote this hip hop saying, you can't hit from outside the club, you have to get in. You have to get into the party to be able to be part of that process. So even as simple as being delegates, it's when you can aspire within parties, you're able to shape outcomes. Just being part of the political party increases your chance of shaping outcomes. In my state, there was a time where a certain religious population felt excluded from the governor's administration. And the governor says something, I can't just choose anyone because they are from that faith. They're not even I can't even see them being part of the politics. And that was a fact, because many people of that faith were not joining political parties and being involved. So please, as much as possible, join political parties. And joining political parties doesn't have to be an expensive venture. When you join at what level, just showing up for meetings, contributing to conversations, being visible, begin to organize within the party. So, for example, you meet other like minds that say, oh, we are young people, or we are young business people, we are young professionals. We want someone who is educated and a professional to be this position or to be appointed to this particular place. You begin to influence outcomes. So that's what I also mean by connect with like minds. Connecting with like minds, engaging and connecting with like minds, whether you're within a political party or beyond a political party, is very, very critical. It's very, very critical because, like I said earlier on, there's power in numbers. There are also joint groups. Again, goes back to my earlier point about organizing. We join groups around your locality, around their issues, around whether it's a pressure group, whether it's a community association, whether it's a civil society organization or a community based on there are many groups that speak to things you believe in. If I'm passionate about seeing development in my local government, I want to join a local government development association, for example, because we can organize there. So those are things we must do from next year and beyond. Vote for all officers. Know all the candidates running for all the elections. Continue being informed. Join political parties. And I will go to happen on this again. Join political parties. We cannot continue to complain that people that are in political parties that are imagined as candidates or that select those candidates are not what we want. Are not who we want them to run our business, for example, make decisions for us. We have to take our destiny into our own hands, connect with like minds, and join groups. So I'll stop here. I can way past my time. So thank you for giving me the leeway to exceed my time. So Pierre, I'll take any questions if they are available.
Thank you very much, Mark, for the very insightful presentation. Thank you so much. That was very, very enlightening. I just love how you focused on the public policy part, and there was a way you also synchronized the importance of good governance and were very pragmatic in your presentation. Can you hear me? Please come. Oh, okay.
Yes, I can hear you.
And you're very pragmatic in your presentation. All right, great. So thank you so much, Mark. It really was a very insightful presentation. I love the examples you shared around the poor public policies, or what has induced what has induced public policy failures, and also how citizens can participate better. And in that light, Mark, can you hear me? Your video is starting, so I want to be sure that you're with me. Okay, Mark's video is starting again. Mark, are you there? All right, so I'm sure Mark will sort that network issue. I'm sure it's network. Okay, it's back. All right, Mark, can you hear me now? Mark, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I was losing you actually.
Yes. Abuja network is really wonderful. All right. All right. Great. So thank you once again for the very, very insightful presentation. Whilst you were, sharing with us already, most of our viewers had started computing their questions, and there are types of questions in the comment section. So just before I, run through some of the already created questions that we have, I would want to just, present some of the questions in the comment section. So we have Michael also asking a particular question, because at a point you were really talking about the importance of citizen participation, and also how lack of citizen participation has also triggered what we've seen today. So he was asking a question: where do we place the most blame for poor public policy and the lack of good governance in Nigeria? Is it the citizens or the government?
Okay, so let me answer that.
It's a very tricky question. Yes. So
okay, so for me, I will blame the government more. I'll blame the government more for lack of good governance, because basically that's literally what government is elected or is supposed to do: deliver on good governance. So yes, citizens have a huge role role in shaping outcomes. The government is responsible for that delivery of good governance. So yes, I will place the most blame with government and not citizens. Doesn't mean that means that gives us an excuse citizens to shy away from the process, but is their responsibility to deliver on good governance.
So predominantly the government. All right. So
Yes.
Oladejon also has a question. She says, "How are the stakeholders or representatives of the general citizens chosen? Are the stakeholders true representatives of the citizens, especially in Nigeria?" I will still add something to the initial question, but I just want you to answer this particular question.
Can you
Did
repeat
you
the
get the
question? I didn't
question?
quite. No, I did
Okay,
not. Can you
all right.
repeat
So
it?
she says, how are the stakeholders or representatives of the general citizens chosen? It's a bit confusing though. Said of the general citizens chosen. I think she
Yeah, the
meant to
stakeholders,
say maybe representatives. Yeah, those representing the citizens
representatives.
across the different
Okay,
political
I think I
offices.
understand it
Yeah.
now.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so let me attempt to answer that. So, so if you look at our nature of our government, we have beyond the executive, we have legislatures at state level and at federal level, House of Assembly, House of Representatives, and your Senate. These are assumed to be your representatives. So they are elected they are chosen by elections. Elections happen. So, for example, on February 23rd, 2023, there'll be elections where you choose your House of Representative member, your federal representative, and your senator. On March 11th, you will choose your House of Assembly member. That's why I spoke about the need to be informed, know who and who are running for those offices, and participate in those
Yes.
elections. But here's the thing with
Yes.
Nigerian elections: even if 5 people turn out to vote, right, there will be a winner will be declared
Yes.
among those 5 votes. And what we have been dealing with a lot of times is declining voter turnout to change. For example, there are elections in the Anambra State governorship election last year, only 10% of people came out to vote. Whether you believe in that election or not, that governor that was elected is going to govern over you if you're in Anambra State. There are by-elections where 3% of the voters turned out. Whether you voted or not, that is representative. So the thing with politics is that if you choose not to do politics, if you choose not to do politics will still happen to you. It will still impact you.
Happen
And that's
to
why it's very
you.
important that you
Yeah.
go out and vote. So vote and choose. So now that you have between October 28th and February 23rd, take your time and find out who are, first of all, what's your federal district? What's your House of Assembly district? What's your senatorial district? What are the people running? Find out about them and then begin to make informed choices. How those are chosen within parties that fill them, that's where I spoke about joining political parties. Parties choose candidates, either it's direct primaries where all the party members vote, whether it's indirect primaries using delegates, which is the most popular, or where they use consensus, where they all come together and agree. And there are laws, for example, the Electoral Act that's passed in February this year that defines how that should happen. So if you also want to influence who emerges as candidates for parties or for a party, it's important you join a political party and begin to get active. But basically, because not everyone can sit in the National Assembly, right? Not everyone can sit in the House of Assembly. So that's why it is a representative democracy where you have to choose your representatives. Those are how they are chosen.
Thank you very much, Mark, for that very brilliant response. I just love again that you are reiterating some of the key points you highlighted in your presentation about the importance of being informed. You just kept saying, "Be informed, continue to be informed," and not just be informed. I love how again you highlighted the importance of getting involved and how we can get involved, organize, join political parties, join groups, also learn more about all candidates running for the different offices. So thank you once again, Mark. So we have another question from Kewede Cornelius. It goes first. How would you react to the popular assertion that Nigeria has good economic policies but no political will to translate such policies into tangible development?
So to me, this is very, very
Did you get the
subjective.
question?
And I think it's something,
Yeah.
yeah, I get the question. It's something that has entered the realm of, let me use the word, almost like an urban legend. While we do have some good policies that are not being implemented well, we also have policies that are poorly designed, and you can't call them good policies. So it's so much of a broad statement that we have so believed and run with that I find a lot of times inaccurate. Until you know the specific policy, what the specific policy says, you can't determine whether it's good or bad, even if it's not being implemented. So yes, there are good policies that exist but not being implemented. But we should also just categorize that our problem is just lack of political will. Lack of political will is a lot of times a problem, but also in some military. You have to know a policy on a case by case basis that you can determine these things.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Your video was static at some point. Thank you so much, Mark, for that insightful response. All right. So we want you to keep your questions coming in. Of course, we have some already curated questions, and I will take some of them in a bit just before we round off. There's a particular question, of course, yes, which speaks to how can democracies achieve inclusion. I know you have spoken extensively about this, but the question still just delves into that aspect of inclusion, especially when it ties into the processes, how decisions are made, whose voice or whose voices count, the outcomes of these processes in terms of distribution of resources, prosperity, and all of that.
Sorry, I didn't quite get your question. Can you come again?
All right. So the question goes to us. It says, how can democracies achieve inclusion more effectively in terms of both processes, in terms of processes and outcomes? So processes in the context of how decisions are made and whose voices count, etc., and the outcomes in terms of the resources, the distribution of resources, that produces prosperity and improves the well-being of the citizenry.
So how can there be more inclusion in the process?
Democracies exactly achieve more inclusion across these two pillars of the processes and the outcomes.
So it's going to be a push. I'm going to answer. It's going to be. I'll define it in terms of the push and pull effect. So the pull effect is being where government deliberately makes sure there's inclusion. And I gave an example earlier on, for example, where you make sure that all citizen groups are part of the decision-making process, or where you provide opportunities for engagement by citizens and where you use their inputs. That's a pull effect. The push effect is where citizens organize and, let me use the word, barge their way in and barge their way into the process. So if, for example, you hear, oh, your House of Assembly is making a proposal, is proposing a certain law that will be negative or policy, you shouldn't just sit down there and complain. You organize and make sure that you organize, you engage, you advocate, you make noise, you meet the right people that you need to meet, you push through. That's the push effect, that's the push part of it. So those are how you can involve in the process. In terms of outcomes, the expectation is that having a good process will lead to good outcomes. Have a good process that has inclusion.
Yes.
Includes all sorts of citizens. And have citizens participating and government making use of their inputs. The expectation is that it will lead to a good outcome.
Great. All right. Thank you so much, Mark. Your video is static again, but I think you have ended sort of, yes. All right. Thank you so much, Mark, for that very insightful question. There's a question that comes to mind as you were speaking. So now, I know there are many agencies pushing that many agencies promoting advocacy, especially within the political space. Not so many agencies within Nigeria. At least maybe a few agencies stand out, but we can see the energy and the impact of a few of these organizations like yourself, Yiaga Africa, and many others. But my question is, in addition to this promotion for advocacy, being led by most of these agencies, are we putting in place ways to measure? Do you understand? Measure the impact of whatever is being done in terms of in the area of the advocacy being made through some of these non-profits advocating for civic engagement, and etc. But really, the question is, how do we measure the impact of the work done by these different agencies in the
When you
light
mean
of
when
pushing for? Yes,
you say
you're saying
agencies,
something.
I'm assuming you mean not you mean private organizations, not government agencies.
Yes.
So how you define how you measure the outcome or define the outcome will be very dependent on what the objective is, or it's dependent to specific to the agency. So I'll give you an example for us in Yiaga Africa. Beyond one of our objectives, some of our objectives include, for example, getting more people to vote, getting more young people to vote, because we have a bias for young people. So we look at, for example, how I was go into government. Now, a few weeks ago, we launched a report on youth candidates in 2023 elections, where we noted that there's a decline. We are measuring by empirically saying how many young people are candidates as a proportion, raw numbers, also as a proportion to the whole. How many young people getting to get elected? How can we do to make this more or to reverse it? How many young people voted? How many people are reached to vote? How many people turn out to vote? Those are empirical measures we have, or that we're able to see and then point and say things are improving or it's declining. So it all depends. So in this kind of case, in cases like this, yes, there are many ways we measure and we can define what success looks
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Mark, for that response. Again, there is a question in the direction of the implementation of administrative structure. So, how do we
like. Yeah.
ensure this implementation of administrative structure across in different organizations? This question has been asked by one of our community members, whether public or private organizations. I know it
Wow,
sounds
that's a tough
extremely
question.
ambiguous. Yes,
That's the toughest question I've gotten so far because we find I'm not an administration expert, so I really
yes,
don't know how to
yes. Okay.
answer that.
All right. It was from a committee
Because
member, but you can
wow,
make you can make an attempt at it.
it's really tricky. Can I pass on that? I think the best I can think of.
Okay, okay, it's fine,
Sorry,
it's fine, it's fine. But you can maybe
yeah, I'm really
respond
not well placed.
to. You said I didn't get that. Okay, okay, I heard you say
Sorry, you are
something.
breaking up on my end. I don't know if it's my internet.
Okay, can you hear me now? Is it clearer?
Hello.
I can hear you. Can you hear me, Mark?
Yeah, you're clearer now.
All right,
So
good.
yes,
All right, that's
yes, I can.
fine.
So you're
Yes, the
saying.
question was being asked. Yeah, the question was asked by one of our community members. So I just stopped the need to ask it because he or she may be on board the webinar at the moment and would have wanted a response to that question. Well, I get you. Yeah,
I,
so
I,
we'll
I
pass it.
understand. I really wish I could do it.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
fine. All right. Okay. So there's also another question from a community member, which says, how can Nigeria,
Okay.
especially in the public sector, pursue and achieve intentional knowledge transfer? She says this is a burning question in her heart, or in his or her heart, as he or she is currently working in the public sector. And there's almost no avenue for knowledge transfer. And she says it's totally dependent on how thirsty you are to access this knowledge. I know there are a few schools already in this regard, but I think I understand where he or she is coming from. But so let me allow you answer this question.
All right. This is a very, very important question because something I've observed a lot of times is that there's a gulf
Yes.
in knowledge between private sector and public sector a lot of times. And it's very, very critical and concerning because in the end, you still depend on government to define policies and to drive governance. So
Yes.
obviously, what the person is asking is how that can be achieved because it looks at as an individual, he or she has figured out how to invest in their own personal development. So one important way is actually to get is for the decision makers to have that political will to drive that and to institutionalize it. Bit of a mouthful. And this is because it's very critical because where governments work or the public sector work is very hierarchical. So influence and authority flows top down, hardly ever bottom up. So you need to have whether it's across, say for example, a civil service or a specific agency to say we want to have improve the capacity of our workers and institutionalize so that it does not change when there's a new leadership, because it's something that also very prone to happening. So you might have an MD or a CEO or a DG come in, and then things are moving, and the next one come and things will stagnate. You need to find ways to start to influence it. Now, as to how this you can make it happen as someone who's not in that position, that's where you're able to organize. So perhaps, for example, organize with your colleagues, push for those things, make
Yeah.
suggestions to people. If you have, for example, a staff union, begin to make this kind of advocacies, begin to push for those things that will get that capacity building to happen. So you're not only just waiting and sitting on your hands and waiting for someone up there to begin to see the need for it.
Thank you so much, Mark. And of course, it's because of this observation, I'm sure premised on this observation, that's why we are also doing what we're doing at Ideation of Africa, to say we should orientate, educate through this webinar series, a better understanding of how to participate politically, because we have realized that a lot of people are averse to political involvement. And that was highlighted in your presentation as well, where you noted that, as a result of the hangover from the military regime, a lot of people, still operate within that level. So I get where the person says there is no institutionalization for knowledge transfer. It almost looks like you have to be the one in search or intentionally or being deliberate about searching up for this knowledge. And that's why we're doing what we're doing. And we are also working on more ways and partnerships with some of the schools within Nigeria who currently are running courses in the area of politics, policy, and governance, so that we can better orientate and educate the citizenry, understanding their rights and how they can get actively involved. So thank you for that question. All right. So let me take just maybe one more or two more questions. I know it's really has been a very enlightening, insightful session, and really this edition has its own flavor. We had a great time at the last edition, still treating this topic, and this edition also has its own extra flavor because I love the direction which was tailored towards public policy and driving an enhanced understanding of what public policies are and how they are so strategic and how they're so strategic within a polity and how they affect directly, a nation. So thank you so much, Mark, for that very insightful presentation once again, and thank you for your time. So if you have more questions, you can type in the comment section. We're open to taking more questions whilst I go ahead to just share some of the questions that I have there. Just maybe one more question just before we call it a day. All right, so I know that you had highlighted some of the issues or the reasons for the public policy failures, and all of that. I don't want us to really overflow why we are where we are, really. Do you understand? But I want us to begin to highlight, and I know you highlighted some of these key elements, but I want to now highlight it specifically across the maybe three levels: local level, state level, and federal level. And it's just really about, I know you highlighted about how people can get involved within their local government levels, get to know your local government chairman, get to know those in those offices or spaces. What about at the state and federal level? What are the key factors that contribute to effective civic engagement at these different levels, whether the local, state, and federal level? What are the key factors that contribute to effective civic engagement?
So it's the factors that contribute at these levels are pretty much the same. It's still about
Yes.
having the factors like, so for me, I think about the multitude of factors that prevent. Because you're able to remove those factors that prevent civic engagement, you're able to get the civic engagement that you desire. And it's just the same thing across all levels. That whole around shedding off your fears, that which actually is a democracy. and we're no longer in a military regime where we have to live in fear and unable to engage. Being able to be properly informed and get in there, be able to organize. And one thing I forgot to note earlier is the reason
Mhm.
why for a lot of times we have this relationship with activists where we think, oh, somebody's an activist, he's fighting for us, and then he's out there and we push the person out there, and then when the person disappoints, we now say, oh, activists are only after their own pockets or their own corner. Or where we come to elect a candidate, we begin to treat candidates, preferred candidates, as though they were saviors. As though one candidate will come in with a magic one, everything will change. Unfortunately, none of these things are true. In a democracy, the most important office is the office of the citizen. That's the most important office. And so we need to get citizens to be alive to the power they have in their office.
Hmm.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I can hear you
So
now.
this around all of this. Be informed, be organized, advocate, engage. All of those things, whether you're dealing with at a local level. So for example, we at Yiaga Africa do a lot of our work, a lot of work at the federal level and some extent state level. But we have partners that do work at local government levels. For example, for the past 8 years, we have been organizing what we call a youth organizing institute. I also organize trainings for organizers and advocates. And many of these advocates
Mm.
are not even operating at local government, but at community level. And you hear the stories of their success, where they're able to use what we learn through our trainings and able to organize to say, okay, we need a new health center in our community, and they get that, or we need to organize women for this, and they achieve that. So all of this, those same playbook more or less applies at any level, even on international scale, actually.
Yes. Thank you so much, Mark, for that very powerful contribution. All right. So, you remember Michael asking a question about who is to blame in terms of public policy failure, whether the government or the people, and you went with you went with, I think, the later option of the government. So Michael is highlighting his opinion here. So,
Yes.
and I wanted to just add something to that. Yes. So he says that, but as it is the case in Nigeria, government fails to provide opportunities for citizens' participation. So I think that is according to Michael that the most blame goes to the people for not organizing effectively for accountability. Do you want to maybe add some few points, or just maybe break it down? Because I think I sort of maybe agree with him, but let me hear your thoughts on this.
I didn't get quite his point. He says the blame goes to who?
The people for not organizing effectively.
So yes, people have. I mean, yes, there's a failure of people to organize effectively. But earlier on, the question was in terms of
Yes.
governance, in terms of participation. It was in terms of
Mm.
governance, not in terms of who do you blame for lack of participation. The thing about people with power is almost every time where spaces have been widened for more people to participate, has been more by from the people than from the government. Whether it is in terms of, for example, women's suffrage, getting more women to vote, whether it's in Nigeria or outside, organizing and making sure government opens the space. So in terms of or in terms of, let's say, not young to run, for example, wasn't people in government that sat down and said, okay, let's implement this. We made aside the advocacy, and then
Very
some
true.
people said, okay, this makes sense. So it's yes, there's a failure of people to organize effectively for participation.
Yes.
My point was that
Yes.
whether organized or not, governance is the responsibility of governments to deliver good governance.
Very true.
But more people participating were able to influence outcomes. We were more likely to influence outcomes. So yes, I agree with him in terms of participation.
Yes, yes, thank you. But I absolutely get your point in terms of, it's also the government has some blame, in terms of ensuring good governance. But in also in adding up to what you shared, Mark, which is also very insightful, we are coming to understand that it is the people that make the government, right? Whether the people serving in office or the people voting for them into office. Did you get that point, Mark? Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Mark?
No, I did not get it. Can you come again?
Okay, okay, okay. Because I can
Yeah, I
see
can
you
hear
in
you
that
now. You're
expression.
saying
You can hear me now. All right. So I said that um, that it is when you talk about the government, we've come to understand that it is people who make the government, right? It is people who are in
Yes.
government. And I said
Yes.
it is people who constitute those serving in government, that is either serving in political positions or yes, and government offices, and it's also people who make the decisions of either voting for them into offices. Do you get it now?
Yes, I get it.
Can you hear me, Mark?
So the point the
Yes.
person is, I can hear you. So the point is that
Yes, yes.
government, people that work in government, still come from the people. So it's still the people's
Exactly.
decision
Exactly.
that's given there. So
Yeah.
yes, it's the people's actions, but also the people's inactions that put them there. It's very
Okay.
important to note that actions and inactions has put this place in
Inactions,
government.
which I
If you
agree.
look at it, for
Yes.
example, where, and I give an example, Anambra State, for example, where only 10%
Yes.
of voters, can you hear me? Where only 10% of
I can hear
registered
you. I can hear
voters
you, Mark.
voted in the last election in November last year.
Mm.
We can now say, oh yes, well, if no matter how the Anambra State government goes, well, it's the Anambra State people that put them there after all they were voted in. But in a case where
Yes.
90% of voters did not vote, it's the inaction of the voters that also put the government in there. You
Very
understand?
true.
If you look at,
Yes.
we have in the last election we had 84 million voters, and the total number of votes was 135 million. So where the remaining 50 or 49 million go to? Inaction also poses people there. Inaction
Very true.
also makes them behave. You understand? And let me apply a law from physics. The whole Newton's first law of motion. The body continues in a state of rest or uniform motion in a straight line until acted upon by an external force. Be that external force to act upon it. You understand? So that's the thing. It's not just enough to say, well, the people allowed this to happen. Yes, they did, but not just by their actions, also by their inactions. So we're trying to combine inaction to
Mm.
actions and the right actions. So that we're taking the right action, you're taking actions. We're having the best of us lead the rest of us.
I love that. I love that. Having the best of us to lead the rest of us. And I love how you highlighted the an understanding of our actions and inactions. Most times we miss it in the area of inactions, thinking that it's just the actions that has a ripple effect, and not realizing that the inactions as well have ripple effects on the overall outcome. Thank you so much, Mark. It has been a very, very worthwhile session. I can see that there are no more questions, and at this point, just before I have you give or share your final words, I would just want to quickly speak to our community members, everyone tuned in right now, on the need for us. Okay, on the need for. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Okay, yes, we're rounding up already. Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you. But it's fine. So, on the need for us to be a part of the Social Innovation School, and in the light of this, in the light of this, I would just want us to listen to this particular content on the Social Innovation School just before I share about it in a few minutes. And ahead of that, just before we do that, I would have Mark share his final words because it would need to he would need to take his leave very soon. So, Mark, please go ahead to share your final words with us.
All right. Okay. So thank you very much for having me again on this webinar. It's been really, really a lot of good time engaging and sharing with you. And I hope that everyone that's
Thank you.
listening, please and please ensure you participate and don't, especially for example, in the next election, get your PVC. If you have registered to vote already and have your PVC, keep it handy. Keep it where you can easily access it and you don't start looking for it on the day of elections. Begin to know about your candidates that are running for all the offices and vote. And begin to become a more active citizen. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Mark. We look forward to many more engagements with you and Yiaga Africa. Thank you so much. All right.
Thank you very much.
Let's go ahead to enjoy this. Thank you.
Whether you're an organization and you're thinking to take your team members through the Social Innovation School, or you want to be a sponsor empowering change makers who don't have the resources but have the passion and the vision to get more done with their work, or you are yourself a change maker and you want to invest in the kind of personal development that changes the game for you as a social savior, then the Social Innovation School is where you have to be. We recognize that this decade, especially for Africa, is a decade where social innovation is going to quicken the prosperity we want to witness across our countries and through nation building. Permit me to once again specially welcome you on board the school with our different courses, amazing learning communities, and the tools, workbook, resources that you need to shift your.
Okay.
Whether you're an organization and you're thinking to take your team members through the Social Innovation School, or you want to be a sponsor empowering change makers who don't have the resources but have the passion and the vision to get more done with their work, or you are yourself a change maker and you want to invest in the kind of personal development that changes the game for you as a social savior, then the Social Innovation School is where you have to be. We recognize that this decade, especially for Africa, is a decade where social innovation is going to quicken the prosperity we want to witness across our countries and through nation building. Permit me to once again specially welcome you on board the school with our different courses, amazing learning communities, and the tools, workbook, resources that you need to shift your paradigm as well as to get the work done on the field. We can't wait to welcome you, and it's going to be a phenomenal journey with you. Ideation Hub holding your hands into the future we're creating together. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much for such a very, we've had a very great time tonight, or rather this afternoon. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. All right, I can see Oladejo in the comment section sharing our appreciation to Mr. Mark. Thank you so much for tuning in as well. I would want to read from everyone as well. How has this edition been for you? Has it been enlightening? Has it been insightful? Let's just read from you in the comment section just before we wrap it up. All right. Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you so much for the feedback as well. Thank you. I want to read for more community members tuned in as well. Thank you once again to everyone who has joined in this afternoon. All right. All right. Let me share a little insight about the Social Innovation School. I know we watched that very great video from our executive director about sharing about the Social Innovation School and why you should come on board the Social Innovation School. So the Social Innovation School is a one-stop, all-access, immersive online education platform for African social innovators and change makers functioning across any of the impact areas, to solve pressing problems within the continent. And of course, we know that we don't want you to travel this journey alone. We know it could be very tiring and rigorous, getting on this journey alone. And that's why we're saying we would love to handhold you. We would love to walk you through, walk with you through the very pragmatic courses that we have already curated within the school. We've had so many great and experienced faculty members come on board across different sectors, not just limited to the development sector. So we encourage every burden, social innovator and change maker out there within Nigeria and across Africa to come on board the Social Innovation School. You can see scrolling on the screen the link to join the school, and I'm sure also in the comment section the link will be shared as well, so you can click on it and get to learn more about the Social Innovation School. We have had thousands of students graduate from the school and have had very, very transformative experiences just by going through the school. So we encourage everyone tuned in, and we will possibly watch this webinar to please enroll into the Social Innovation School. Thank you once again to everyone. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Oladejo. Thank you to everyone who is tuned in. And we look forward to having you join us at the next edition of the Social Impact webinar. We have the Development Dialogue coming up. And in a few days from now, the registration website will open up and you can definitely register to attend. We have an array of speakers across the continent, prepared and already geared to share with you at the dialogue. And you know what the dialogue is? It promises to be very, very, very transformational. And we encourage you to be a part of it. The moment you see, you get access to the registration information. Thank you to everyone once again for tuning in this afternoon. And we look forward to having you continually engage with us across our different social media platforms, and also through the Social Innovation School. Do enjoy the rest of the. See you at the next edition.